You're listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Today in Manufacturing podcast. I'm Jeff Ranke, and as always, I'm joined by Anna Wells. But Anna, there's something a little different today.
David looks weird today.
He does. For some reason, David Mantian, with some questionable priorities here, has decided to take care of his wife and children as opposed to joining us. So we went to the bullpen.
Because I'm a team player.
Went to the bullpen and we called in Andy Zoll. Andy, great to have you back on the podcast.
I'm thrilled to be back. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So you know us as the editors of manufacturing.net and industrial equipment news, or IEN.com. Again, each week we look at the 5 biggest stories in manufacturing, as well as the implications they have on the industry moving forward. Before we get to those stories, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast. You'd also help us a lot by giving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you use. And if you want to get a hold of us, feel free to email the podcast by getting a hold of Anna, Andy, or Jeff at IEN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. We're also streaming live today, so if you got any questions, feel free to fire those at us. Anna, you ready to get going?
Let's do this.
Excellent. First story. On February 6th, 2019, an excavator operator working for Kilford Engineering was digging on a trench to install fiber optic conduit in San Francisco. The mini excavator's bucket struck a PG&E gas pipe, causing a leak and igniting the natural gas main. No one was injured, thankfully, but the blaze reached more than 3 stories high, torched 6 buildings, and had damage of more than $10 million. 100 people had to be evacuated from the area, and it took PG&E nearly 2.5 hours to isolate the damaged pipelines. There's also a 50-minute delay in finding the street-level valves that PG&E needed to close in order to stop the flow of gas. And just to make things a little bit weirder and worse, PG&E's gas mechanic was stuck in traffic. At the time, there's a lot of questions about what took the utility so long to respond and get things under control. But thankfully, a new report from the National Transportation Safety Board found, big surprise, that the accident's probable cause was Kilford Engineering's failure to follow safe excavation practices. So, Anna, there's a couple different things we could respond to here. Mm-hmm. What were some of your big takeaways from the story?
Well, I tried to look at the positive side of this. Obviously, like fires in California have become like consistent and senseless at this point. One good outcome around this situation that came to life in the past few years is California's Dig Safe Board, which has started to enforce damage prevention laws. It appears it was not yet doing so at the time of this accident, but it is now. And the group is looking to take sort of a pragmatic approach to correcting unsafe practices. They're not really focused on like punitive action unless, somebody's doing something willful or negligent. Mostly they're trying to correct bad behavior. It's hard to measure the effectiveness of something like that in terms of like fires prevented, right? But I think it's important. Perhaps if it had been functioning at the time of this accident, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Considering, as you said, that it's been blamed on sort of like operator error, unsafe practices being utilized here. So California is trying to target this at like kind of the user level. We don't know how it's working, but hopefully it is working.
Well, I mean, that is one of the things that we do like to see coming out of these. This is a horrible incident. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but they are taking an approach to try to stop it going forward.
Right.
Andy, if you're that guy in traffic and you see this 3-story high fountain of fire lighting up a part of San Francisco, how are you feeling about being stuck in traffic?
The obvious first problems here are that this company didn't follow protocol, that PG&E wasn't able to figure out what was going on there right away, and that California didn't have proper oversight. So those are the main things. But also, the idea that this a PG&E supervisor went to an officer, and the officer, we understood, requested a police escort for this mechanic to stop the, again, 6-building, 3-story, $10 million fire going on in the city. And the police were like, no, you got to do something else in order to get that taken care of. We have other things to do. So it was a curious response from law enforcement. Let's say that.
Well, and the way that this was put together, the way everything was sort of formulated here, it sounds like this was the guy. So how does PG&E have like one guy in San Francisco who was the one who needed to be there to try to shut everything off and get this fire under control? Again, I mean, 2.5 hours to get this under control when it was essentially turning off some valves.
Well,
I mean, that's oversimplifying it, but
and PG&E kind of got wrapped up in this, but this wasn't their problem, right? This guy was laying fiber optic cable, is
True.
my understanding.
That is true.
And he hit a PG&E gas line, and that company has had some big problems in the last couple of years, especially as it relates to wildfires. So that's unfortunate for them that they got kind of, I don't know.
that is a good point. This wasn't necessarily their fault. It was operator error, but it seems like kind of an obvious one. It took 2.5 years to come out with this report to basically say, hey, be careful when you're digging stuff up. I think getting, kind of what you were talking about, Anna, it's important to come away with some best practices when these things happen. It seems like that was a bit long for something like that. The one thing I was thinking a little bit about too, and I know it's a little bit out there, but we couldn't get a police escort to get this guy on site. One of the things that's been talked about to sort of mitigate some of this in the big cities, all the congestion and traffic is like autonomous aircraft, like commuter type choppers and things like that. I don't know, maybe in a situation like this, could that technology have been
Yeah, but
more
doesn't he
helpful?
have to like drive to like the launch pad of that and get stuck in traffic on the way to that? I just don't like.
It's on the roof of his building, maybe,
I
could
don't
just
know,
jump
maybe.
in there. So, all right.
If you get autonomous cars, then supposedly traffic flow would be better, so you may not need the police escort for the one guy in the city to stop a $10 million fire.
You think that autonomous cars are going to fix the California's traffic problem?
I mean,
I'd love to see it.
they couldn't make it worse. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, is it the cars or the drivers? I guess if there's
I mean,
fewer California
San Fran-
drivers, that could not be a bad
in
thing.
San Francisco, it's both, but it's the drivers.
So I know this isn't funny, but to me it is, like, because we're from the Midwest and we drive in ice and snow and we're used to it. But like, have you ever been in California and it starts raining and then no one will go over like 35 miles an hour and it's raining and you're like, this is rain. It's not even frozen.
Yeah, they lose their mind.
I know.
Yeah.
It's just a different, I'm not knocking anyone from California. I love California, but it's just a different.
No, my brother says the
Different
same
life.
thing down in Scottsdale, down in Arizona. They get some rain and people just they just don't go out. They don't know what to do as far as getting around and driving. It
Gonna wait this out.
yeah.
Yep. Wait it out.
Exactly. All right. Moving forward, our next story deals with maybe some uncooperative neighbors here. Residents in Neptune City, New Jersey, which is about an hour's commute outside of New York City, are complaining about a nylabone plant on the Jersey shore. One resident described the odor coming from the plant as rotting dog food-like excrement. Well said, I guess. I don't know. The factory has been next door to the neighborhood for decades, but these smell complaints, didn't ramp up until dog treat production was recently consolidated there. So they didn't have any issues making more dog treats, bad odors, bad smells coming from this facility. Nylabone president Glenn Axelrod stated that the company recently spent over $2 million on odor abatement, charcoal filters, other types of improvements focused on solving the issue. He added that what residents are smelling is non-toxic and simply the process of making dog treats. If it were a bakery, he said, you'd be smelling baked food. If it were a steakhouse, you'd be smelling steak. Andy, I don't think folks are complaining about donuts and ribeyes.
No, this did remind me of that the bakery on the east side on East Wash here, where you used to smell baked bread
Bimbo,
coming home
yeah.
all the time,
I
and you don't
remember.
anymore. No, this is. I feel bad. I do have some experience with living in close proximity to a dog food facility. There used to be one in my hometown, and it's not a great smell to begin with. And this sounds particularly bad, and it's even worse because. As you mentioned, this had been here for years and years and years, and then they started a new operation here, and then it got to where these people apparently were pushed beyond the point of no return here. However, this is in Neptune City, New Jersey, something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
That's 30 miles from the chemical coast, so it might be worth some perspective about the kind of facilities you could be living by. And I also appreciated the company officials' or the CEO's candor. Sometimes you get stuck in a little bit of PR speak, and he was basically said, "This is how we do it. And there's not a lot we can do other than these mitigation efforts. But, at some point, it's still a dog food or dog treat factory.
Well, as David Manty likes to say, it is what it is, right?
He loves to say that.
He does love that saying. And I can appreciate a lot, and I agree with a lot of what Andy said, but it also seems like when you start, people are talking about getting headaches and getting nauseous, and he's saying, stick it out. Is he being a good neighbor?
Yeah, that's kind of one of the issues that I had. You called it candor, and I can appreciate that perspective. I felt like it was maybe flippant. I don't think the residents probably appreciate his tone. You can tell he's fed up. I know that, as you said, they've installed $2 million worth of odor control and mitigation type technology. That's great. But to say that, you'd be smelling steak if this was a steakhouse. I bet they wish it was a steakhouse. This is not the situation, and I don't think it's nice to take lightly their concerns. And from a practical standpoint, I think they need to continue to play ball with these residents. Otherwise, they could face some significant risks. Take the case of a California meat rendering plant called Darling Ingredients. A group of citizens who live near its Fresno plant sued the company over the smell. And after decades of drama relating to this, the company's plan to relocate to a more rural area fell through, and they decided that they would close that plant permanently instead.
Wow.
And that was in 2020, they made that announcement. And their agreement with this citizens group requires them to pay $10,000 a day if they're late closing the plant. And the city of Fresno was actually going to pay $1 million towards their relocation when that was part of the plan.
Yeah.
These stinky plant problems, as much as they are sort of kind of like a punchline, they can be really expensive. They can drag on and on and on. These residents are not going to back down on this, most likely, So he's got to figure out what can we do to meet some kind of a common ground here, or they're going to be in for it for years and years to come, I think.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I did look at this facility sort of on a Google satellite type image, and it is smack dab in the middle of neighborhoods. There's just houses all around it. So in terms of trying to move or maneuver the facility, not a lot of options. And to your point, you're talking about jobs and things of that. This facility employs over 200 people. So yeah, it's a job creator for the community as well. I did also notice some restaurants in the area. So they've got to be not real pleased with some of these smells coming out of there as
people
well.
Want to eat outside and stuff right now. It's just that's not a good time for it.
And one of the things that it made me wonder is, and because we've talked about these before, with these types of stories before, and as these facilities grow, the big odor issue here emanated from the fact that they were consolidating some operations and doing more work at this particular facility. Does there need to be different zoning considerations for different manufacturers as they expand? In a lot of instances, they're sort of grandfathered in because they've been there doing the same stuff, but now they're doing more, and there's more of an environmental impact. And I'm not saying there's a negative, toxic environment that's being created here in any way. But Andy, do we need to look at some of the zoning considerations as manufacturers grow and expand like this?
Probably, but it's like everything else. There's a cost benefit of, imposing more regulation and more complex regulation. It's all a matter of where you draw the line. And if it's, a facility that's been there for decades, employing people in the community, right in the middle of town, I don't know if a zoning change would make much difference as opposed to a place starting from scratch and all the consideration that goes along with that.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to get that stuff through. You mentioned grandfathering in businesses, but if they've been community members, tax-paying members of the community for years and years and years, it's really hard to make those kind of changes. But I think the change should start at the dog treats. What is in dog treats? Your wife is a vet, Andy.
Yeah.
What is in dog treats that smells like excrement?
So these Nylabones are, I think I have one lying around the house, and I think it only serves me to stub my toe on. It's half chewed and stabby now.
Stabby, which is something you look for and something at the ground level.
Yeah.
I actually, I asked about those because I know we've had them before, and she was like, well, they can be good for oral health as long as you don't chip a tooth. So again, cost benefit here.
Okay.
But they're these, I don't know what they're made out of exactly. Probably should have looked into that before we did this segment, but they almost appear plastic-like, and it's just for a dog to chew on, to occupy them, so they won't wreck your house, basically. So As far as
who knows what that is.
it may be more of a plastics, chemicals type smell than your traditional dog food type smell.
I think it is actually coming from raw meat, like because that is a big part of what they are made out of. It's why they're so appealing. It's why dogs like them so much, apparently.
So it's rendering and stuff over there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you get more of that. There is definitely a smell that comes with it. So we'll see how this one plays out. Moving on, our next story, also dealing with some difficulties in a local or community manufacturing facility. Apogee Enterprises, which manufactures architectural products used in commercial buildings, recently announced a reorganization that will close plants in Georgia and Texas. These cuts will include laying off about 400 workers. A plant in Georgia will shutter by the end of this year, and production will move to Owatonna, Minnesota. The company expects a one-time loss of up to $35 million, which includes about $6 million for severance, and another $18 million on equipment and facility write-offs. But moving forward, it could save up to $30 million annually by 2023. Anna, we've seen a lot of this type of stuff going on, kind of coming out of the pandemic. What's your reaction to this one?
Well, the first thing I thought of is, it was interesting how we talked about the remote work element of the pandemic in a largely positive way when it was happening in 2020. I mean, offices closed down for a while. Energy use went down, emissions went down temporarily. Personal vehicle use went down, people's maintenance costs, gas, all that stuff went down. And the other side of that, of course, is these businesses that relied heavily on like commercial construction and commercial real estate being healthy. And Apogee says that their orders were depressed due to the pandemic. And if you look at the data, in 2020, 17 out of the 20 largest metro areas saw commercial construction starts decrease in 2020. And in some places, they were down by like almost 50%, which is huge and catastrophic to a business that supplies to that market, right? That's hard to come back from. I think that that's in play here. It's interesting, I think, as we view the economy now and we see the boom, we see the explosive growth, we almost forget that the pandemic's impacts economically are still kind of playing out. I think we're going to see more businesses that were maybe hanging on by a thread to try to see what happens next start to make some cuts, maybe some closures because they're determining that they can't get out of that hole or that they can make do with fewer locations, like in this case.
Yeah.
And so I think, people need to be kind of ready for that eventuality because I don't think that we're quite past that yet.
Yeah. In the capitalist economy, there's always a time where the herd is thinned a bit. We're seeing that in greater numbers now with a lot of consolidations, not necessarily places just closing completely, but consolidating work as a result of the pandemic and a lot of the factors Anna was just mentioning there. Looking big picture, long term, is this sort of a short-term pain for long-term gain in terms of strengthening U.S. manufacturing by limiting some of these weaker companies, or what do you think?
It could be. It's tough to read into broader trends just from one company's decision to streamline. So you always want to be cognizant of that. But also there's unintended consequences, as you mentioned, to all these things that happen as a result of the pandemic. So I mean, we all kind of figured out early on that work probably wasn't going to be the same, even if things got back to normal. People can work from anywhere. There's no need for them to live in these expensive cities. There's no need to construct all these, glass towers as much anymore. So that's one industry that probably could be hurting as a result of this.
Absolutely. And Apogee is totally getting out of the architectural glass business. Yeah. So you're talking about glass towers. Was that a pun? Did you intend to do that?
I almost never intend to make puns, but I'll take them if I get them.
So I think it was interesting because they're totally getting out of this one businesses and this a way of consolidating what they're doing, trying to streamline, become more efficient. That's another thing that kind of has me wondering, as we see some of this happening, there's less competition in some of these markets then. Is that going to be driving up prices that have sort of a negative effect potentially on some of these purchasing areas?
Potentially, of course. We're seeing the effects of the pandemic impact this economic boom right now in many ways. And, that's one of them, I'm sure, already. Yeah. Fewer competitors, fewer workers, fewer supplies available. It's just the perfect storm of craziness.
But if there's fewer buildings going up too, that'll depress prices. So it's obviously
Yeah, kind of interesting.
That's true, to balance it out.
We'll see what happens. Yeah.
Well, I know my daughters, we just did a big construction expansion at Middleton High School, and they were complaining because there's like no natural light. So get some windows in there. Help these guys out.
Interesting. They just blocked the whole.
They were frustrated. It looks like an office building. I'm like, well, get used to it. Yeah. Institutionalizing them at an early age here. Moving forward, another folks that are struggling to get along here. That seems to be like the theme of this episode. A couple weeks ago, we talked about how GM filed a lawsuit claiming that when Ford named their new driver assist program Blue Cruise, it was a deliberate attempt to confuse buyers and rip off the name Super Cruise that they use for their hands-free technology. Guess what? Ford has responded. And according to the Detroit Free Press, it has filed a request with the U.S. Trademark and Patent Office asking the agency to rescind some trademarks owned by GM, including Cruise and Super Cruise, because the best way to get something done quickly is to get the government involved. That will always be the best route to go. Ford argues these terms should never have been trademarked, and rescinding these trademarks allows the industry to, quote, freely use the word cruise to safely describe their driver assist technologies. Andy, I didn't realize Ford was just so much less about making money and trademarks, and they just want more freedom, more personal liberties involved in the automotive sector here.
I mean, if they really wanted to go fast, they could just file a lawsuit. The legal system obviously goes much faster than the patent office bureaucracy. I also didn't know you could just ask for trademarks to be rescinded. I guess you can ask for anything and see what happens.
I just wrote a note about it. Here it is. You just slide it across the table.
Hey, we think you screwed up. Try again. Yeah. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if or how the patent office responds, because maybe there's a proper channel for that. It's hard to say. I'm always, and I'm sure you guys talked about this when this story first surfaced, but I always like to be reminded of stories that people or corporations trying to trademark things that maybe should stay in the public domain a little bit more. And I want to get through this story, but I was reminded of my favorite hoax of all time, or one of my favorite hoaxes of all time, which was someone made up a story about Metallica trying to copyright a particular chord sequence, the E and F chord. This is probably 20 years ago now, so that dates me pretty good. But it'll be, and again, I'm sure you guys mentioned this, but trying to trademark the name Cruise when we've had cruise control for decades and decades and decades, seems just silly, but we'll have to see how the patent office deals with it.
Just part of the vernacular at this point. See, and I thought you were going to go like in the whole happy birthday thing. Like there's some sort of like thought out there, like every time that plays, somebody gets
someone gets a dime.
Yeah.
Didn't the trademark just expire on something like that?
I don't know, but
I should have looked.
I've violated it numerous times.
Yes, sir.
So,
sure.
What do you think, Hannah?
This stupid thing, I don't know. This is just an example, I think, of corporations taking themselves too seriously. And I am of the opinion, and I don't know if you guys agree or not, but that very few brand names are as recognizable as companies want to believe that they are.
I agree.
I mean, there's been recent reports that brand loyalty took a big hit during the pandemic. A lot of that was due to like supply shortages. People couldn't get the products they usually buy. They buy other ones. But I think also in large part because of e-commerce, and that's actually been reported, that when your options are kind of this seemingly endless scroll, you have all these, you can prioritize in whatever way: cost, delivery time, 5-star reviews, whatever. We know that names like Ford and GM are very familiar and recognizable. But when you're trademarking every tiny piece of technology that's within a vehicle with these like super generic names, like, does anyone care?
No.
Does anyone notice? Like, I think Ford's argument is partly that the name Cruise is so generic that it applies to tech that's contained within nearly every car. And it's great that GM was savvy enough to try to brand it as their own. It's really not theirs. But their quibble over this name is just noise to me. Like, I think they're getting more coverage for this stupid spat and maybe more branding on these systems than they ever would otherwise. So maybe that's the goal. Maybe they're working together.
Probably
on
what
this.
they were after all along.
Yeah, maybe they're teaming up to do that. But like otherwise, like, do you know what your infotainment system is called and what's the trademark on it?
Does that really impact which car you feel is
Right.
better or you're going to buy? Yeah,
I think that they're overblowing the idea that people are like looking at these names and they're like, which one is which? Like, I don't care what it's called. Like, no one does, I don't think. But
well, especially, and we talked about this before, you're talking about a technology that really has a negative rap. Like, especially because everything Tesla's had with the autopilot. We start talking about hands-free technology and autonomous driving. It's not the greatest thing to be touting in the first place because it does have a negative reputation right now. Long term may be, and I think maybe that's what GM is doing. But again, we talked about this before. GM has better things to talk about right now. And Ford doing this, it's almost like playground type stuff. Like, if you do that, I'm going to tell the teacher. Well, I'll tell the principal. Well, what do they do? Going back and forth and seeing who can tell the bigger.
the principal is the patent office.
Exchange letters to the U.S.
Where does it go from here?
Yeah.
As a result, I think they both just look kind of petty over something that nobody really cares about.
No one
I mean,
does.
what is the best possible outcome? I mean, what does either one of them really gain by this? Do they get like some sort of bragging rights at the,
Publicity.
Yeah, I guess we're talking about it. We're
Yeah.
talking about them,
Yeah.
but just in a sort of negative way. So it just seems like an odd thing for them to be arguing about.
Well, yeah, it is. And like, Andy kind of alluded to this before, but like when people trademark things that the public feels are like part of the vernacular or colloquial, like I once saw this episode of Kitchen Nightmares about this restaurant in Baltimore called Cafe Hun. And they had, I guess Hun is like a regional
Okay.
in that area. That's just people call each other Hun. And they had trademarked the word Hun. And they got just this vicious backlash from the community. Everyone was so angry about it because they just felt like, well, you don't own that word.
that's our community
We
word.
all do,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that's not the point of this. Obviously, no one even knew, I think, that it was trademarked. But now they do. And,
Well, it's not even like a unique spelling of it or something. I don't know. Just seems like they're really, they didn't have anything else to do. I don't know. So,
maybe.
all right. Moving forward, our number one story of the week was about a prototype military plane that crashed outside of Moscow. Earlier this week, a Russian military transport plane, again, this was a prototype, crashed while performing a test flight. And unfortunately, all 3 crew members on board died. I'm not sure how to say this, the LL-112V crashed in a forested area as it was coming in for a landing at the Kubinka airfield 28 miles west of Moscow. Russian police have opened a criminal probe on the incident. The plane flew to Moscow last week and was set to be unveiled later this month. It's also the first military transport plane developed in Russia from scratch since the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Production was actually expected to begin in 2023. They're hoping to make about 12 of these planes a year. Apparently, they're still on course to begin production in a couple of years. But Anna, kind of an interesting story, obviously tragic, but also kind of highlights a lot of the things that do happen when we're looking at product development at this scale.
Yeah, obviously not a good outcome for the first military transport plane developed in Russia since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's hard to know what happened here just yet. The plane was a prototype, obviously, but the country's military had been testing it for a few years, and its development began in 2014. So it's not like a new product, but I thought it was interesting. There's also a version of this plane in development that will be for civilian air travel. Russia has had to go through something of a rebuilding of its aviation industry after the fall of the USSR. And they have one of the worst safety records in the world to show for it. A report in Al Jazeera published in July after a civilian plane crash killed 22 people said that 75% of crashes in Russia were caused by pilot error. But they say that there's also a chronic problem with airlines using super old equipment that's not offering the precision that's necessary for consistently safe flying. So despite this tragic scenario with this prototype, hopefully it's positive that the Russians are making progress on new airplane technology. I mean, I guess that's like the most glass half full way you can look at this. But what they're doing now is not working. They're flying a lot of these little prop planes and stuff around. There's not always roads available to fly domestically. And that's caused, there's a lot of mountains, that's caused a lot of airline crashes. They need the appropriate technology and equipment in order to navigate in that area. And so it's good that they're doing that. Unfortunately, in this case, it didn't work out well
Absolutely.
this time. But
Andy, it was kind of interesting that we actually got this much information out of a Russian military incident like this.
It is. You have to take things like this with a grain of salt when it's coming from state-controlled media like that. But there was a video of this posted online, and that appeared to show reportedly that this plane was coming in low. A wing looked like it was on fire, and then it just took a sharp turn and plummeted. So that doesn't bode well for the manufacturing and product development process of this project, which has been going on for a long time and which had problems earlier. This particular plane made its first flight in 2019, and it had problems then. It was too heavy. They had other improvements to make, and then it just started flying again after a delay of 2 years to try and make these adjustments in March, and then this tragedy, of course, happened. So the idea that this project is still on course seems a little optimistic to me at this point, given all the problems we've seen.
Absolutely. I think one of the big things that they were trying to do with this plane is it's not only it's a transport plane, but they were trying to get the weight down. So obviously it'd be more fuel efficient, more easier to navigate, probably faster as well. Just to offer a little bit of perspective, they're looking at this one holding about 5 tons of cargo. The U.S.'s most popular cargo and troop transport plane is the C-130. This one, if we look at 5 tons, about 10,000 pounds. The C-130 can hold about 44,000 pounds, about 22 tons. So they do have some catch up to do there, which explains why maybe they were pushing this more aggressively and trying to get things done maybe before it wasn't ready. And you talked about sort of the track record here. What I'm wondering about, too, is when we hear these crashes, we understand that is part of the product development process, but we hear so much about autonomous aircraft right now, too. Do incidents like this, Andy, do they sort of push that autonomous argument more strongly? Do they bring that to the forefront more? Or is this just sort of an acceptable price to pay at times?
I mean, obviously, it seems like the more assistance you can give pilots with autonomous technology, the less margin for error they have. And Anna talked about how pilot error is responsible, maybe not in a military context, but in Russian aviation overall, how pilot error is a lot of, most of its problems are attributed to pilot error. So people are always slow to trust AI, especially when it comes to something that can be as nervy as flying. But
True.
I mean, we're already a lot of the way there, truth be told, as far as these planes being able to, stay the course themselves without a whole lot of intervention from pilots when they're actually in the air. So, definitely. We will have to. I don't know that we'll ever know the circumstances exactly behind this particular crash, but overall, it seems like, and I suppose this is to be expected, more autonomy has dramatically improved airline safety, aircraft safety.
What do you think, Anna? Does this do anything to sort of push that argument?
I mean, for what it's worth, is my understanding that this specific plane was developed using all domestic supplies. There was nothing outside of Russia that went into this plane. I don't know if that's their goal overall, in which case I don't know how close they would be on some of this autonomous tech if they're trying to rebuild from scratch. So I don't know. It's a good question.
Okay. We'll see how it plays out and see if we get more information. That'll be kind of interesting. So those were the big stories this week. Now we want to move on to the in case you missed it. Some stories we thought were pretty interesting, but just didn't quite get the reader engagement levels. Anna, what was your in case you missed it this week?
Sure, Jeff. More drama in the snack food industry as workers are striking at a Mondelez plant in Oregon, one in Virginia, and one in Colorado. Their previous contract has expired, and the workers are alleging that the new healthcare program the company is proposing, along with changes to overtime pay allowances, are, quote, a slap in the face amid the record-breaking profits the company has enjoyed since the pandemic enhanced America's appetite for both Chips Ahoy and Chewy Chips Ahoy, I'm guessing. I don't know the numbers.
I'm in on both.
But you do wonder, I guess, why this is happening right now. The Oregonian reports that Mondelez's new contract offer would require bakers on high-demand production lines to be on a compressed schedule of 3 to 4 12-hour shifts per week that wouldn't include overtime pay and would eliminate automatic premium pay for weekend shifts. So basically screwing with the workers' established shifts and pay during a time that demand is super high, profits are high, and workers are scarce. Doesn't seem to me like the time to play hardball. I don't know. I mean, like the Mondelez worker strike is following strikes that we saw at Frito-Lay, 7-Up. We saw a California Keurig Dr. Pepper plant unionize recently in under the Teamsters. I think we've discussed this before, but the labor movement is really getting a boost right now from this worker shortage, and expectations are changing. And I think employers kind of need to tread lightly right now. I don't think this is the time to get aggressive. And so, that was, I thought, an interesting story because just the repetition of it, it's getting to be more consistent that we're seeing some of this pushback from workers.
Well, what I don't get it with these stories, and they seem to be consistent. The workers, they don't want to be working ridiculous numbers of hours like we talked about. Was that the Frito-Lay plant that we talked about last time?
Yep.
Or just ridiculous
72-hour work weeks. Yeah.
In this instance, they're just like, hey, if we're going to work overtime, pay us for overtime.
Right.
How is that a difficult premise to grab onto? I mean, that's just part of working in a manufacturing facility. So that one's hard to understand, especially when you see the increased revenues and food prices are up too. So, I mean, their margins typically in food is tight. It's tough. But if they're seeing more profits, they're selling more stuff, and their prices are higher, which I've noticed when I'm going shopping, this is a tough one to understand.
I can't figure out how you would, in this time with this high demand, would let it get to a strike. I just can't. You know, if you want to start off with a stronger position and then go through the collective bargaining process, okay. But to let it get this far when there's money to be made, frankly, and maybe they are betting that long term they'll make more money by screwing the workers out of their overtime pay and their weekends. Maybe that's what they're betting on. And that seems a little cynical to me, but.
Well, it just seems odd because in the past you could replace these folks. You could get more workers to come in. That isn't the case right now. Yeah. So even taking a hard line, it's just kind of a head scratcher. So the big question though is, Andy, during the pandemic, is there a snack food that just you've gravitated more towards or really seen your?
I cooked a lot more than I would have, which was probably a good thing. As far as snack food, I don't know. Potato chips. I'm more
of a chip guy?
Yeah, more of a salty snack guy than a cookie guy. Yeah, I would say that.
But you, Anna?
So during the pandemic, our costs went down a little bit. So we started buying fancier cheese. And with that, I started buying the crackers of my grandparents, which it was like sort of embarrassing. But
is that the brand name? The crackers of my grandparents?
Breton.
Oh.
Have you ever had Breton crackers?
Yeah,
like the big round, like wheat crackers. I also threw my back out this week, so I'm $1 million now. I just want you guys to know that. That's the evidence. I will lay it.
Britain crackers and back problems. It's how it all. It's just all downhill from there.
That's my life now.
Nice. Yeah, we have seen a huge uptick in Cheetos and tortilla chips.
Ooh.
I mean, just a lot of that going on, and I'm not really hating it.
No, so, Cheetos are excellent.
I was actually on a plane with a guy coming back from a food show. He said his job was quality assurance, so he would go to all these Frito-Lay plants and like check stuff coming off the line. And so I asked him, "What is like the best thing? If you can just grab something off the line?" He said Cheetos,
like a hot Cheeto,
hot Cheeto, fresh out of the oven. He said there's nothing better. So just think about that.
Should we be
lunch.
Putting our Cheetos in the oven before indulging them, or is that
totally where my mind went?
Yeah, might be worth a taste test
like
at some point.
Cheeto nachos or something, huh?
Wow.
There you go. I think we're done now.
We got to leave this
Wrap
area.
it up.
Yeah.
We still have some stuff to do, Andy. What did we miss?
We missed. So we already talked a little bit about how or at least approached the subject of how the pandemic changed work. We've all gotten used to our Zoom meetings or whatever your remote meeting program of choice is. And this week, Facebook released an app that it calls, where is it here? Horizon Workrooms. And so they released a little demo. And what it is you put their Oculus headset on and you kind of scan your little workspace, and it puts you in a virtual conference room with your little cartoon avatar, and you hold a little cartoon avatar meeting in virtual reality, just like you would sitting around. Now, in the demo, they have people collaborating and laughing and writing on whiteboards, virtual whiteboards.
Right.
And I'm wondering how they would be able to recreate my meeting experience, which is keeping my head down, trying not to say anything so that I can go back to my actual job.
Right.
So maybe checking your phone once in a while.
Who wants to put on a headset? Like meetings aren't bad enough via Zoom or whatever. Like,
My theory is that nothing has caused the public to embrace the Oculus so far, despite Facebook's impressive investment in it.
Yeah.
So maybe they tried the literal most boring thing alive to see if it makes it take off finally.
a business application.
Yeah.
That'll get them fired up.
That'll get
Because
'em
everybody
fired
loves meetings. I'm just trying to think of what the avatars would look like. Like in this office, I cannot even fathom.
They look like, if you ever played the Nintendo Wii, they look a little like that in the demo.
Yeah, but people are going to find out a way to get around that. Like,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
going to be somebody whose like hair is going to be on fire.
Oh, I
and-
think you can probably take some liberties with yourself if you want.
So what are you seeing if you're in the meeting and you're not in VR? Like, because there's always going to be like a bunch of people that do not embrace the technology. Do you not get invited to the meeting?
There's, I believe, there's
Is
a
that the way we
maximum
use it?
of 16 in the room at the time, but
Yeah.
up to 50 people can be in the meeting. They just can't have their little avatar in there.
Oh.
So I assume it'd be like everything else. You just kind of sit off to the side and roast the people who are actually there.
So you just see other people with their headsets on, just being like,
No, you see their little avatar.
Yeah.
"Oh, okay."
in the
So you
cartoon meeting
so
room,
there's
yeah.
no visual. Like if you're not using the VR headset,
You look dumb with your little headset on, but no one can see you.
no one can see you. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like a Ready Player One type thing here. It's kind of weird.
A little bit. Should maybe approach the executives about maybe a demo of this.
One's here. Oh, yeah. Try it out.
Think about it.
That would be hilarious.
Mhm.
That would not go well.
No.
Can only imagine what those two people behind the camera would do in such a situation. Anyway, moving forward. In case you missed it, I could not get past this story just because I can't believe it's actually a story. And this is the fact that Lordstown Motors, you remember them? Remember if we talked about them before at all? Have we
Lordstown.
mentioned
yeah.
them? Yeah, they're poised to begin limited production.
Stop. Just stop.
How in the world? I mean, I know they'd have to put limited in front of production, but how can they be making anything right now?
They're back.
I mean, and they're shooting for it the beginning of next year. Right now, they said they expect to begin limited production on their electric pickup next month. Yet the future of the Ohio startup remains hazy. I think that is a very generous term. Although they did get a bunch of money, like we did talk about that before. But what they're thinking right now is they should be able to get stuff into regulatory approval by the end of this year, and then to the first deliveries to a select group of customers should begin in the first quarter, with commercial deliveries expected early in the second quarter. So apparently they do have people on a list who have ordered these trucks, and they're going to make them for them. They have a deficit of just under $370 million right now, or at least it was at the end of June. So I don't really see that going up once you start to make stuff without any more money coming in. Mm-hmm. So as much as I feel for all the workers there and as much as you want this to work, man, how can this continue to go? And who are they actually delivering it to? Who is actually going to plunk down money for one of these trucks after everything that they have been through?
No, I know. Like, you know that there's always going to be early adopters. People get geeked up about this tech and they want it. But like, also, what happens when the door falls off and this company is just like completely shut down like 3 weeks after you bought the truck? I don't know. I wouldn't feel good about spending.
This is the next DeLorean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like DeLoreans kind of became kitschy. I mean, if it wasn't for Back to the Future, would we remember DeLoreans? Mm-hmm. And I mean, what's going to happen here? I think that's what these trucks are going to end up being like, unfortunately. I hope I am like 180 degrees wrong on this. I would love for this to work, but God bless them. They keep trying, I guess. I don't know.
Should they call it, instead of limited, call it maybe hypothetical production with their hypothetical customers?
We're really hopeful
Yeah.
that we can get these out the door.
Did I ever tell you guys that my neighbor has a DeLorean?
Wow. No,
Yeah.
you have not. How could you skip over that piece
I
of
don't know.
information?
He never drives it. It just sits in his garage. Sometimes I see it
That's
when
what you do with them.
go by and I can see it in the garage, but I don't know.
Doesn't take it out because it might break.
Well, maybe, yeah. Like really the door literally does fall off on that one.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. All right, that's in case you missed it. Guys, looking forward to next week. Any closing thoughts? Andy?
As per usual, when I sit in on these things, I do not have much of a closing thought. I just like to thank you guys for having me again, and look forward to David coming back.
You're
Hi, David.
like, I just really want to get out of here.
Yes, Dave Big Timber Manty should be back in the saddle next week. Anna, any closing thoughts?
I just wanted to mention that I went school supply shopping with my kids last weekend, and the fresh notebook high.
That's still real, huh?
It's still real. It never goes away.
Yeah.
Like I saw like all the stacks, and I was like, "Give me them!" Like I just wanted. It was so fun.
That and the crayons.
And like the new erasers, like I don't even think my first grader will use a pencil the entire year, but somehow she was asked to bring 2 erasers, so we're doing that. But
All right.
yeah, it was
Interesting.
exciting. It was an exciting day.
See, and I got over school supply shopping with my kids the first time I had to battle some soccer moms for like the teal blue notebook. Like, no, I need these color and this color and this color. And it was just a battle royal in the big Target bin trying to
Yeah.
find the right colors. And I tagged
Slapping
out.
people's hands.
I
and,
tagged out on that one because I was going to be one of those people in those videos from like Black Friday
yeah.
throwing elbows. Wouldn't have been good.
I assumed all kids had tablets. Is that not the case? People still use notebooks?
Oh yeah.
Still use notebooks.
That's comforting.
Yeah.
I'm operating on paper here still because I forgot my laptop, so that's comforting that other people are still operating on paper.
It's still a thing. Yeah.
That's great.
You're good,
Love it.
man. You're
Love
good.
it.
My closing thought is I'm going to do something this weekend I have never done before. I'm going to go to a Renaissance fair. So any tips or thoughts on the Renaissance fair? I'll say right now, the over-under on turkey drumsticks is like 2.5.
Are you wearing a costume?
No.
Jeff,
No. I'm not wearing a costume.
be honest.
No. Although we do have some extra elf ears that I could try to throw on there. I don't think I can pull that off though.
Let us know how the mead is.
The mead will be fantastic. I will sample many of it, much of it.
Take the over on those turkey legs, huh?
You're going to take the over?
I'll take it.
It's going to be more than 2 in it. You're going to, okay.
We'll go 3
see
or
what
higher.
happens. All right. We'll update everybody on that next week because that's what everybody will be anticipating. All right. Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us this week. Again, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast. If you got any feedback, please let us know at Andy@IEN.com, Anna@IEN.com, or Jeff@IEN.com.
But mostly
or
Andy.
David@IEN.com is also acceptable. Also encourage you to subscribe to our daily and weekly newsletters. Thanks again for joining us. This has been the Today in Manufacturing podcast. Thank you for listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.